Last Tuesday, some of you may have turned on the news. Some of you may have been celebrating in one form or fashion, but on Tuesday, we celebrated Shrove Tuesday or Fat Tuesday, which is the day before the season of Lent, and it is the last day that a lot of people think that they can partake of all wonders of things, whether it be food, whether it be more, how shall I put this, nefarious things. New Orleans is a perfect example of that with their Mardi Gras celebration. But on Wednesday, we begin what is called Ash Wednesday. And Wednesday marks the 46 days leading up to Easter, in which we enter into a time of penitence, a time in which we start to go inward and to try to understand what God is doing for our lives, and trying in ways by giving up things, by emptying ourselves, ways in which we can become closer to God and God's love. This morning, on this Sunday, we begin a new sermon series. I don't know why it's not working. There we go. Sermon series called Return to Me with All Your Heart. And what we will be doing during this time of Lent with this sermon series is that we will be marking ways that we are grateful and ways that we come closer to God. And so we begin. Oh, well, that was the reason why it wasn't working. Colin needs to turn on his clicker. I wanted to start my message by showing you a very special picture of our family. This is my daughter, Emma, who was married in October at their wedding. And starting on the left is my daughter, Anna, and my beautiful wife, Kathy, and then Emma and her new husband, Dan Cohn, and the bald-headed dude you know, and then my daughter, Katie, and her husband, Luke. And I put that picture up because I place a lot of meaning in family. It has been said that family comes in a variety of different ways. There is a nuclear family, which some of you resonate, but family can be built in a variety of ways. It can be built among friends. It can be built among various people that we know in our lives, but we all long for that sense of belonging in some family and in some way that we can belong. I remember as a child sitting around the dinner table and relishing in the stories that my parents told about how they grew up during the Depression. And I remember those stories of my father telling about World War II, because he was a World War II veteran. And I just remember sitting around that dinner table with my mother and my father and maybe some aunts and uncles, and just soaking it up like a sponge, because it was part of my family legacy. It was part of, if you will, my DNA. And it was so wonderful to hear those stories and to know my family history, as I'm sure it is for you as you start to learn your family history. Today, in our scripture reading from Deuteronomy, In a sense, it is part of our spiritual family history. Our scripture lesson today takes place with Moses and his people waiting on the mountain, ready to go into the promised land. We know by reading Deuteronomy and other books in the Old Testament that it was a longing for Moses to go into the promised land, that land that was once named Canaan. But Moses would never make it. He would never go into that promised land. But in our scripture lesson today, this is the words of Moses, supposedly. What Moses is telling the people about this land that they are about to inherit. And of course, that's a whole nother story. But this land that they are about to inhabit, that it was conceived of as a gift from God. And therefore, the people needed to be thankful for that gift that they were about to receive. It was a time to remember. It was a time to remember the struggles of leading up to that time and that place up on that mountain, because we know, of course, the struggles of the people of Moses being released from captivity from Pharaoh in Egypt, and then wandering for 40 years in the desert wasteland, trying to find that place where they would eventually land. And so Moses, during this piece that we read today from Deuteronomy, Moses is reminding the people to be thankful, to do certain things in order to be thankful. He talks about the harvest, the fruit of the land that they shall take from the ground. And he talks about putting it in a basket and going to a place that the Lord will choose as a dwelling for his name. In biblical terms, Old Testament terms, that was a tabernacle or sanctuary. And it was there that they would go and they would declare to the Lord their God that they had come into the land and that they were to give thanks for all that God had given them. And then Moses goes on in our reading today and talks about the history that brought them to this place. He mentions a wandering Aramean, which is probably Abraham, his ancestor. And they went as an alien, or lived as an alien in Egypt, few in number, and there they became a great nation. And it was there that they encountered the Egyptians, who forced them into hard labor, and as this version of Deuteronomy says, harshly and afflicted us by imposing that hard labor. They cried to the Lord, and the Lord delivered them out of their affliction, their toil, and their oppression, and brought them out of Egypt with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm to that place that they were looking over in this story from Deuteronomy. That place, that land, flowing with milk and honey. And then Moses commands them to bring first fruits of their labor and to be grateful for what they have and to celebrate all the bounty that the Lord has given them. My question to you is, as we begin this time of fruitfulness, as we begin this time in which we celebrate the gifts that God has given us. As we look at God's generous heart to us in whatever form or fashion we experience that generous heart, are we thankful for the gifts that God has given us? Just about a month ago, in fact, it was a month today, that we celebrated our 150th anniversary of being the Walnut Creek United Methodist Church. We celebrated the wonder and the joy of being blessed with this church and the number of times that we have held worship, over 7,000 times without stop, to this community, and all the wonderful things that we have done in people's lives. As you look inward, as you assess your own life, do you have things that you can be thankful for? I mentioned my family. I am very thankful for my family. Are you thankful for your family? Are you thankful for those things that God has given you to equip you for the journey of life? Your professions, your homes, your places in which you exist in your own particular communities. You should be. But more than that, more than just assessing those material gifts, those things that God has given us in order to support ourselves, there's one thing that will never end, that we must be thankful for every day of our lives. And that is, of course, God's grace in our lives. Last week, we had a time in which it was hard to celebrate God's grace in our life. Many of you know the story behind the United Methodist Church and their vote recently to exclude certain people because of who they are and because of the way they try to live out authentically their lives in God. And it's a time of deep sorrow. But again, in this church and in churches that authentically live out the love of God as we know it through Jesus Christ, those churches know that we can never bar anybody because they don't measure up in some way. That's God's work, not our work. All that we're asked to do is to love, and as I always say, love extravagantly. And so as we go forward during this time of Lent, this first Sunday, we will be giving you a reminder of that, and a reminder to remember who you are and whose you are. As you go outside of the service today, you will be given a rock. Now, I don't want you to throw it at anybody. But on that rock is written the word remember. And each Sunday, as we go forward in Lent, you will be given certain takeaways that I want you to put someplace special in your house. And this first takeaway is your rock. And I want you to put it someplace where you can see those words, remember. Because that is the most important thing that we can do on this day, is to remember that grace and that love that God has given us and that we must carry forward in our lives and in the world.